Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of Digital Adoption Show, where we host top L&D, HR, and tech luminaries and talk about what's next in the future of work. I'm your host, Rachita Menshi. I work as a product marketing manager at Whatfix. And today we are going to discuss how learning can transform lives for the better. We are joined by Andrew, a seasoned professional with over 13 years of experience in L&D and also has had some sales roles within MedTech and pharmaceutical industries, primarily at J&J or Johnson& Johnson. Now, as a director of global commercial learning and development at Gilead Sciences, Andrew leads global strategy, curriculum development, and best practices for the company's commercial and medical affairs teams. Andrew, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us today. Why don't you go ahead and give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show today. It's great to chat with you live. Again, Andrew Viglione. I currently work at Gilead Sciences, but I have about 13 years experience in MedTech and pharmaceutical, right? So I've been in sales, I've done learning and development, done a number of stretch assignments across the industry. Most of my time was spent in MedTech. I recently shifted over to pharmaceutical in the past several years, post pandemic. But again, really, really excited to be here.
It's great to have you on the show, Andrew. Thanks for this opportunity. Before we start a discussion, we have this short segment where we, explore distinct, more personal side of our guest. So, Andrew, is there a passion or activity outside of work that's particularly close to your heart? Would you like to share that with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do all the cooking in the house. So I'm a big, I wouldn't call myself a chef, but I do a lot of the cooking. I find it to actually be very relaxing, which I know not everybody finds that to be the case. So I do all the grocery shopping in the house and tend to cook all the meals. So that's probably one of my biggest pastimes during the work week. And then on the weekends, living in California, a recent transplant from the East Coast, but living in California, a lot of hiking, getting outside with the dogs, enjoying the beautiful weather in the Bay Area.
Oh, it's lovely to hear how, you have all the hobbies that I aspire to be. And you also have dogs, which I would love to have one day. But thanks so much for sharing with us. Next, we have a quick rapid fire round with three quirky questions, which we call triple strike. So, are you ready to be triple strike, Andrew?
I'm ready to be triple striped.
Awesome. The first one is: if your life were a movie, what would the tagline be?
Man, that's actually a difficult one. When I think about taglines, I think probably more about quotes. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, so there's a quote in Lord of the Rings that's essentially says, "All you have to do in life is control your time and what you do." It was one of the Gandalf quotes that was given to Frodo, but essentially, life is all about what you can control and you can't control. And there's a lot of things you can't control in life. So, for me at least, it's what I can control on a daily basis to keep myself sane and on track for all my goals.
That's lovely. What's your go to song or dance to get yourself hyped up for a challenge? What do you usually listen to?
And so I was a late 80s, early 90s child. And so that means all the EDM craze was hitting when I was in college. So one of my favorite songs is Avicii Levels, which is probably dating me a little bit at this point, but big Avicii fan. And Levels is just one of those songs that I keep going back to over and over again.
That's great. Third one would be if you could design your own signature sandwich, which three ingredients would you absolutely have to include in it?
Signature sandwich. I'm actually a big sandwich person, right? I'm very picky about my sandwiches and where I go. But I would have to say it's probably not a signature sandwich, but I'm a big fan of Nashville hot chicken. So Nashville hot chicken sandwich. Specifically, I'll give a shout out to Hattie B's in Nashville, but Nashville hot chicken, coleslaw, pickles, but I love honey on hot chicken sandwiches. So I would say it's probably got to be hot chicken, honey, and then probably some pickles or coleslaw on it as well.
I'll be traveling nearby soon. I'll definitely hit you up for some recommendations. But thanks, those were some really cool answers. Now, on to our main discussion. We would be asking you questions about the role, about, how people can go ahead and create global learning strategies. How can they measure ROI? So I'll just quickly start off. And before we dive in, could you share a little about your journey, starting from sales to where you are now in L&D and how that whole thing panned out? What have you learned? Things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a journey over the past 13 years for sure. And I never really necessarily knew what I wanted to do when I was in college, but I figured out very shortly after going into the business school at Xavier University in Cincinnati that I definitely wanted to be connected with what I was doing. And that led me to sales, specifically pharmaceutical or med tech sales, where you could really see the impact of the product that you were using live, both with customers and patients. And that's what led me to my first role within global learning and development in a program called the Sales Training Representative Program at Johnson& and Johnson, which is really an entry-level program to get people into the sales organizations at large med tech and pharmaceutical companies. I did that role for about 18 months and then transitioned into med tech sales. And I was a med tech sales rep for a number of years. I spanned markets from Kentucky to West Virginia and Northeast Ohio. During that time, I had a lot of really great experiences across med tech at Johnson& Johnson. And that led me back into training, a training manager role, which I think is a pretty typical pathway for most individuals in pharmaceutical and med tech. My passion has been learning and development for a long time. I don't think I necessarily realized it when I went back into learning and development, but very quickly I realized the passion behind really taking the time to help people understand and see people understand and see people really flourish and be successful. And that led me to a couple other decisions in my career, very much guided by mentors over the years around how do I continue to expand my knowledge and competencies within the learning and development space, continue to learn about the organizations that I work in. And so for the next several years, I focused in on several acquisitions within Johnson & Johnson. So several organizations that were acquired by Johnson & Johnson, looking at how training was integrated, looking at really the different cultures was the development opportunity for me, seeing how things were done outside of J&J without leaving J&J, which led me to another role with one of Johnson & Johnson's acquisitions at Johnson & Johnson Surgical Vision. Had the opportunity to lead a sales training org and build that organization at Johnson & Johnson Surgical Vision, which it was known at the time. Had a really great 2.5 years at that organization and then transferred over to pharmaceutical back into a sales role. One of the things that I realized early on was I wanted to make sure that I was really diversifying my experience and looking at gaps. And one of the areas that I knew that I hadn't experienced yet was the pharmaceutical sector. So I had the opportunity to go over to the pharmaceutical sector and be part of a team that had just started up. And that team really coordinated strategy between all the different functions within the organization, med affairs, sales, marketing, or contracting groups. And I was really happy at the time in my role, but, had an opportunity pop up. Somebody reached out to me and had an opportunity to compete for a role where I'm at today, Gilead Sciences, which brought me back into the learning and development world. And then for a lot of personal reasons, gave us a lot of opportunity to change the location we lived and try something new. And shortly after that, we ended up in California, and that's where we are today.
That's awesome. That's been a journey. I can definitely say that. And I'm sure that had some great experiences on the way. But going back to learning and development and your role, how has it been strategizing curriculum for teams? I know it's a major challenge. It's always a challenge, and people are definitely looking for experts out there who can do that, especially for a global team. So tell me, how do you balance the need for, one size fits all, but also a need for tailoring these to specific personas, specific person with different pace of learning? How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an easy one to ask. And as many of the learning and development professionals know that have to work with global teams, a really challenging question to answer. And this is one of the things that I've been working on since I stepped into the new organization I'm a part of. There's a lot of really unique reasons why I chose to pursue the opportunity I'm in today. And one of those reasons was looking at creating a global learning and development team and contributing to a global learning and development team that was really in almost a startup type phase, hadn't existed for a long period of time, was still being established and was still growing. And so a lot of the barriers that you see in larger organizations weren't necessarily there or were very different here in the role I am today. So one of the things that when I stepped in was really took a look at, if we're going to do things on a global perspective, I knew from prior experiences, the organization couldn't just create and deliver things on a global scale, right? There's amount of contextualization that's needed on a global market level, but there's also a lot of stuff that can be done on the global level that can assist our global partners in deploying content or information to their markets. And really what it comes down to is a little bit around competence versus confidence and competitive nature in the marketplace. And so one of the things that we've been doing and one of the things that we've really focused in on that's gained a lot of momentum is understanding where at a global organization can we make things easier from a competence and confidence perspective so that the global marketplace can really focus on the confidence piece, which has a lot of nuances in many different countries, but also really own the competitive piece to be competitive in their market. And they're really the only ones that can do that. So one of the strategies and the strategy that we've employed is get out of the way of the markets to allow them to own their marketplace and really accelerate where we can operationally and with core competence type material to allow them to do that.
That's awesome. But I'm sure you must have faced your own bit of challenges while, trying to identify competence and trying to make sure that everybody is also learning on the way. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced and how did you overcome those or are still overcoming those?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we are still very much in the early phases and building a really strong foundation to ensure that we can get ahead of a lot of these challenges. And if challenges do happen, we're really thinking thoroughly about how we navigate them to create long term sustainability. So one of the main things we do is really garnish as many insights as possible from our global affiliates. And what we're doing is really trying to understand what their vision is, what they're trying to do, and where we can really reduce duplication globally. Because for a global organization, like global learning and development, that's a lot more about the strategy and operation versus the actual execution. There are a lot of things that we can do to help our global affiliates execute quicker. And that's where we're really focusing our time. And I think from other organizations, and I know from other organizations where a lot of the roadblocks came is global teams, whether they meant to do it, their intent was to do it or not, they started getting into the gray area of helping global affiliates execute. And I think that's where a lot of global organizations will hit a lot of roadblocks, slow down, or quite frankly, be unsuccessful, is when they can't provide value to something that somebody else really should own from a knowledge perspective. And so we look at the scale of what we've been doing globally of some of the terms, competence, confidence, and competitiveness. And we just know that from a global scale, no matter what markets we worked in, we'll never be able to, on a day-to-day basis, keep up with the information flowing in from global affiliates around how they can make their people competent and how they can make their people competitive. So it's very much a story that's continuing. But where we've been able to start focusing a lot of our time is that operational piece. And that is, how do we create courses that drive competence? How do we create shells of core help drive confidence for our global affiliates, no matter where they may be in the world? How do we provide baseline metrics and data, not only baseline metrics and data using our learning enablement system, but also work to drive learning effectiveness within their organization so they can start to tell the story about not only the value of training people as they come in for new hires, but really that 70% of on-the-job training that needs to continue beyond a new hire coming in and onboarding. So we've been able to do it a couple ways. And I'll just reiterate quickly is really simplify what we're doing versus what our global affiliates are doing and getting out of the way of them driving confidence and competitiveness for their people, but also more importantly, really arming them with the information, the data, and the metrics to be able to tell the story to their leaders outside of learning and development, who we know don't always understand some of the intricacies or why we do what we do, to convince them that, hey, if you do things a certain way in learning and development, right? The speed to access to your customers will increase. The ability to coach competencies will be taken on faster by your learners. So there's a lot of different ways that we're employing, and we've been successful so far. We still have a very long journey to go, but we've been really successful in kind of segmenting those things so that we can allow people to really own what they are best at.
Yeah, I'm sure that, N&D teams' inputs and outcomes are directly tied into the business outcomes as well. And great to hear how you are doing it. One thing that I've, consistently heard from a lot of N&D leaders, not just in the pharma industry, but across industries, is how there has to be a regional touch and how they need to take care of that sort of regional flexibility and the local, be it regulations or anything that has to be included in the learning programs. How do you do that while delivering consistent learning? So that's for global team, but also taking care of the flexibility that you have to offer to regional teams.
Yeah, it's a great question and probably one of the biggest challenges, especially in pharma and med tech and biotech, is the copy approval process with medical affairs and legal and regulatory, especially when you start to look at, again, markets that are really, can be really specific in how they do things and the way they deploy content and what can be said about certain material. And this is something that we are very early in the stages here in my current role in taking a look at. But I do have experience on the other end of that where, been very established in an organization with a lot of tools and a lot of resources deployed globally. And the roadblock's still there. It's still the same roadblock, whether you're in an established organization or organization building out a global team. And I think it goes back to the original strategy of how content is really deployed and who is focusing on what. And one of the biggest things you run into around contextualization is the way you go to market with claims, the way you interact with customers, the way you refer to certain things in the marketplace. And from my experience, what I found is a lot of that goes back to application and that thought of how do you train people to be competitive in the marketplace. And so the approach that we've been taking most recently is, again, we have so much we can do from a competence level. And we know that when you look at whether it be a disease state or the use of a specific product, right? How you use a medical device, the steps to use, or you look at how somebody is affected by a disease state like HIV. That's going to be the same globally, no matter where you are. And so you look at all the things that are the same or equal, and there's a lot of places where the organization can contribute from a global level to ensure that we are duplicating efforts. And then the challenge comes more maybe on the application side where you start to bring those things to life, and you really need contextualization to be able to do that. Not only because it's best for the sales individuals in the market or med affairs individuals in the market for them to best understand their customers, but it's really not something that global teams can do with the amount of confidence or quite frankly competence that the global affiliates can do. So again, it's the way we're structuring the content, what we build versus what our global affiliates build. And the more we move towards confidence and competitiveness, the more we rely on our global affiliates to fill in those gaps so that they can own that process, so that we are caught up in a copy approval process for quite frankly the information or content that's really not going to meet the local needs of a specific global country.
That's great. I'm pretty sure that whoever is listening to this right now and managing a global N&D team, they would absolutely resonate with what you've said and take a lot away from this session. I think you mentioned that you've been part of so many different teams, be it in the N&D space or otherwise. I'm curious to understand, is there a significant difference in how N&D is strategized for these business units? And if yes, how would somebody in your role look at that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Again, there's a lot of nuances, whether you're in med tech or the pharmaceutical space. And I think that when you look at global organizations, we're looking at strategies for a lot of different business units. The organization I'm in now has several different therapeutic areas that absolutely have to be approached differently based on the end use of the drug or the product. Same in med tech as well, whether it's an implantable device or a single use item. There's definitely nuances along the way, and that's something that really has to be accounted for. And again, we look at this scale of where we could help globally, whether it's competence, confidence, or competitiveness. And it brings in a little bit of another layer around, what is best for a specific therapeutic area. And I think that a lot of that again comes into play once you move more towards, application or building confidence and then competitiveness in the marketplace. And so using the same strategy as we're looking at from a global scale and what type of content we put out, when you look at the different therapeutic areas, the goal at the end of the day is to let the therapeutic areas own their strategy. Now, we can't put out content for every single therapeutic area for every single country and have thousands of pieces of content. But again, as we look across, there are just so many similarities in terms of content and duplication. And I think this gets more into the design of how we're designing content. I always make the analogy, and I took this from a prior manager of mine years ago, that learning and development is a little bit like Disney World or Disneyland, if you're familiar and you've been in the US. Other than the caricatures, which are basically sales trainers, right? If you think about it, you don't really see any other employees running around on the grounds. That's because there's tunnels underneath Disney in Disneyland, and most of the employees are running around like crazy under there, making sure everybody has a good experience. That is learning and development. And so, although we may show up as a single course or a single training, what we have to do to get there is incredibly complicated. And so, I would answer this question in the end with it's about how we design things and how we deploy those. So, in terms of how we design those things, taking a very modular approach to ensure that we're designing very specific tools and resources so we can sub things out where needed, I think is incredibly important. And to be able to do that, we really have to understand where those distinct differences are. And then on the deployment side, right, we can deploy that all as one piece of material, but we've taken the time and we built the foundation to the background to really identify, again, the pieces that are all standardized, regardless of therapeutic area or regardless of country, all the way down to, hey, this is one single piece of material that we have that we know probably needs to be contextualized by country, by therapeutic area. And the discussion more becomes, is this really something that global should be creating, or is this a piece that we can rely on our global affiliates who know best to create? And so there is some complexity in the background, but again, what it enables us to do is to allow our affiliates to go to market quickly because they're the ones that are responsible for the execution piece. And so a lot of moving parts to that, right? We have to bring in the right people to really look at how we organize our data and how we have a global content catalog to inform our decisions. But really looking at, again, that Disney World approach. How are we setting ourselves up in the tunnels to be able to deploy content in a way that's going to give a really great user experience? I think one danger that I've seen in the past, and I will say this, is a lot of times what I see is a big piece of content be put out for one specific area. Now, the user should always see one big piece of content in terms of learning about the disease state of HIV, right? That's probably one course that a user goes into and feels that that's one course they're going into. It feels continuous. But as we look at it from a content perspective, we may need to break that down into a couple different pieces of parts in the background, because again, that's going to enable us to go to market a lot quicker and enable us to tailor the things that we need to tailor.
Yeah. I think NND is really powerful when it comes to creating best practices and creating scalable solutions. But the tricky part is acknowledging and identifying that, yes, there will be certain differences based on which team you're enabling, which team you're responsible for, learning and development, and then assigning the right folks, identifying the right folks who can take that task up and do it. And in your role, how do you use data to drive decisions and improve learning outcomes? I'm sure there's a lot of data that is being recorded, but how do you actually leverage that? And when it comes to measuring ROI in learning programs like the one that you've mentioned, what metrics do you think organizations should definitely focus on to gauge the true effectiveness of it?
Luckily, I have a really amazing person on my team, and all they do is learning effectiveness, and they're an absolute rock star at this topic and really understands how to take that data and be able to provide that ROI, as you said, to tell the story to senior leadership. And we're still relatively early in that journey. That journey started before I joined the organization that I'm in today. So I do not take credit for starting that strategy, but I could not have been more excited to see that this type of role existed in an organization, especially an L&D organization, to be able to provide the data and metrics to bring, to really bring learning to life or show how learning comes to life to our senior leaders. We use the Kirkpatrick model is what we refer back to. A lot of people who have looked at learning effectiveness or even L&D professionals in general have probably heard of the Kirkpatrick model. A lot of vendors use the Kirkpatrick model. And so I wouldn't point to one specific type of metric that we're measuring because I think that varies based on the business plan or the plan of actions that are happening year over year and what the specific countries or organizations need to demonstrate. But I will tell you what we look at is a couple of things. We look at, when we're going to do analysis, it's like, do we have an end in, right? Are we clear on what type of impact needs to be demonstrated? But more importantly, do we have the baseline metrics to be able to take that data and extrapolate it to more impactful data that's going to help tell a story? Now, we can tell our senior leaders that, hey, 100% of the people completed this assignment and the average score was 95%, or, 100% of our managers have done field coaching reports in the system and they've met their minimum criteria of doing one field coaching report per quarter, right? Those are probably more vanity metric, although important to tell a story that people are using the tools that we're investing a lot of money into. We're really looking at the next step of the metrics. How do we now take those metrics and show based on sales numbers coming out of our CRM or based on numbers coming out of other parts of the organization, that there is a correlation to what is happening, whether that's somebody coming out of new hire training, that somebody that scores well in new hire training or somebody that's engaged in new hire training gets up to speed a lot quicker and hits their number or is more likely to reach Key Club or Winner Circle, whatever it may be called in your organization, to looking at, someone coming out of maybe a mid-year meeting or a national meeting, focusing on competitive selling, that, those that complete the pre-work and participate at the meeting, again, have the best sales numbers when it comes to a product that really is being targeted to make competitive impact in the marketplace. We need those foundational baseline metrics to do that. And then really where the focus is, how do we extrapolate that to really tell the story around the impact that's happening post training? There are a lot of numbers and learning theories out there, but I think what we know, whether we say 30-70 or 60-40 or whatever it may be, that a majority of the learning happens on the job. And the danger we get ourselves into and what we see with a lot of sales-minded leaders is get my person through training as quickly as possible, get them to pass, get them certified, and then we'll be fine. And we know that that's not true. So having those data and metrics to tell that story is so incredibly important.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I think that's also a very similar ideology that we follow at Whatfix, which is, it's not just that you have data for analytics, but also what you do after you have that data, right? How do you use it to enable your users? How do you use it to identify the right strategies or the right way to enable the users? And yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Thanks. This has been, this discussion has been truly enriching, Andrew. And your journey has been definitely unique and inspirational. I'm glad that we had an opportunity to talk with you today. Any parting thoughts for our listeners, Andrew, that you think people should be wary of, people should really look forward to, anything that we did not already talk about?
Yeah, we talked about a lot today, and I feel like I just scratched the surface on a lot of your questions. There's just so much here, and quite frankly, for learning and development professionals, so much to be proud of. And the parting words I would say, and this is ring true so much personally and professionally in the recent months is, control what you can control, right? And as you look at your job and your day to day and what you can do as a learning and development professional, focus on what you can control and the rest will fall into place because the end goal is to create impact for your people. Learning and development, we all want to feel the same thing at the end of the day. We all want to feel that our learners are successful and they have success in the marketplace. And we want to create that culture of learning. So if you control what you can control, keeping in mind the uncontrollable and managing it, that will lead you to the end goal.
Yeah, superb. Thank you so much for joining us for the podcast today. And to our listeners, stay tuned for more content like this. featuring incredible thought leaders just like Andrew here. And we are available on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Whether you're at home or on the go, our podcast is your gateway to learning about the latest trends in L&D, HR, and tech. I'm your host, Rajita, signing off. Bye bye.